Welcome to the Sublime Woman Summit, a summit about being a woman now, free, embodied, aware. This virtual summit brings together women who have a unique and powerful opinion on different aspects related to 21st century womanhood. Watching this summit will make you feel empowered, inspired, embodied, and connected to yourself and your potential. So you can rise, you can feel, lead, and love on new delicious levels. I am your host, Lynn X. I am a pleasure and love coach, fearlessly guiding women into sublime lives filled with pleasure and joy. I am passionate about hosting powerful and transformative events and programs that allow people to learn and to unlearn, to exist from their depths and to rest in love moment after moment. And today I am joined by Michelle May. And Michelle May is a recovered yo-yo dieter and the founder of Am I Hungry? Mindful eating programs and trainings, which offer non-diet, weight-neutral, mindfulness-based workshops, retreats, support communities, and books at www.amihungry.com. Over 700 health and wellness professionals have been trained to facilitate 700, or Am I Hungry rather, programs worldwide. Dr. May is the award-winning author of the book series, Eat What You Love What You Eat, that teaches mindful eating to help individuals resolve mindless and emotional eating and senseless yo-yo dieting to live the vibrant life they crave. Yes, to living a vibrant life that all people crave. Well, dear Michelle, when I hear craving, I, of course, think about the topic of our conversation, which is the craving for food and the problematic eating that so many women, and myself included, suffer from. Why is it that so many women struggle with their eating?
Oh, such a complicated question because it's obviously multi-layered. However, I would say that it really stems from two major places. One is our cultural obsession with thinness, with appearance, with body shape and size as a measure of our self-worth. And so from a very young age, many women have been indoctrinated into this belief that their body has to look a certain way to be acceptable. And so that, for many of us, starts us on a path of trying to change our eating, trying to change our bodies in ways that maybe aren't natural for our own bodies. So I think that's cause number one. Cause number two is once we start down the path of dieting, in other words, restricting and depriving ourselves of the foods that we love, it's very common for people to then give food more power than it really needs to have over us. And so we find ourselves thinking about what we can't eat and craving the foods that we're going to eat when we're not on our diet, either on the weekend or some point in the future. And so that creates a disordered relationship with food. So it makes sense that if we are experiencing uncomfortable emotions, whether it's stress or sadness or boredom, that we might reach for these special foods to make ourselves feel better. So I think it's really all of these things that cause this disordered relationship with food that's, as you said, so very common now.
And so you say, like, it's what are the emotional layers underneath the emotional eating? You said it's stress. It's what are the typical situations in which people, go for eating as a solution to feel better or as a way to feel better.
Right. Well, I think it's really important to first say that eating for emotional reasons is normal. It is part of our very human existence to eat because we're cuddling with our mother, or we're celebrating a birthday, or we're soothing a hurt. Emotional eating is a healthy behavior. And so to think that we need to stop emotional eating actually causes more problems for people because they feel guilty about something that's actually quite natural. When people begin to have trouble with emotional eating is when they're using food instead of listening to their emotions to see what other information the body is trying to provide about what their needs are. And so I think it's not all emotional eating that's becomes a problem. It's avoiding our emotions altogether that becomes a problem.
Yes, and what would be ways that people can break the spell or can break this and change this pattern?
You know, surprisingly, the simplest way to do this is through mindfulness, which is simply awareness of what's happening in the present moment. So if you notice that you feel like eating, rather than immediately beginning to think about what you're allowed to eat or what you want to eat, just take a quick pause and check in and ask yourself, am I hungry? In other words, does my body actually need fuel right now? Or is it possible that this desire to eat is coming from something else? Now, it's not always a deep, dark emotional trigger. It could be simply that you're thirsty or tired, or that you saw an advertisement or somebody else eating. It could be a mealtime or any other number of triggers that aren't necessarily emotional. Or it could be that you're really in need of a break, that you're feeling overwhelmed or feeling sad, or that there's a difficult conversation that you need to have that you're dreading. And so for all of these reasons, we might reach for food to feel better. And food works. I mean, let's face it, it works fast. It's readily available. It often tastes delicious. And so it's very easy to grab a bite instead of actually addressing what's going on underneath.
Yeah, I find it very interesting, the fact that you mentioned that it's normal, it's natural that we kind of use food to soothe ourselves. Because I think indeed we are born this way in a way, right? Because when we are
Absolutely.
babies, this is how our mothers soothe us with the milk that they gave us. And I've read that you talk about acceptance and self-acceptance in the process of kind of also transforming the relationship and getting out of the cycle. Could you elaborate a bit more, what acceptance, what the power of acceptance is in your work and in the
Absolutely.
mindful eating?
Absolutely. I think that compassion for that part of ourselves that wants to feel better when we're uncomfortable, that is a healthy, normal response to discomfort. So instead of shame or avoidance, if we can simply pause for a moment and say, gosh, I feel really uncomfortable, or I am really sad, or what is this that I'm feeling that is making me want to reach for food or work or alcohol or sleep or whatever else that you use to avoid facing these discomforts. And so when we start from a place of compassion and acceptance, lots of people experience this, or I have felt this way before and I have overcome this, or I feel sad. Anybody would under this circumstance. When we start from that place, instead of a place of, oh, I'm a bad person, or, oh, my body is terrible, I want to eat, but I shouldn't because I'm unacceptable. When we start from that place, we have no hope of practicing self-care behaviors. We end up practicing what really amounts to more punitive behaviors.
Yeah, because maybe you can explain a little bit, and I think a lot of people will recognize themselves. What is the cycle then? What happens when people overeat or do emotional eating?
Well, I call it the eat, repent, repeat cycle. So maybe we've been dieting and now food feels very powerful and we find ourselves thinking about it all the time. Then we feel stressed out or some other emotion comes up and we lose our willpower to avoid these foods that we love so much. And then we begin to eat. Then there comes a phase afterward where we feel physically uncomfortable and regretful, maybe even guilty if we've been in a pattern of dieting. And so then we repent. Okay, I'm going to be good. I'm not going to eat that food. We don't even pay attention to why we were doing it in the first place. We completely skip over that step of noticing that, gosh, I was really stressed and I missed an opportunity to try to deal with my stress. And so we repent. And then because we are now back to deprivation and restriction, and because we never dealt with the emotional trigger that caused the eating in the first place, we're back in that same cycle. So the way we break out of it is, first of all, as I said, to notice whether we're needing food or just wanting food. That's a huge door opener, because when we can begin to pay attention to why we're eating in the first place, it gives us many, many more options. It doesn't really matter what you choose, but choose instead of simply reacting out of habit. And then when you notice that you're wanting to eat for reasons other than hunger, now instead of thinking, oh, I shouldn't eat, now we say, okay, well, what is it that I'm really experiencing? What am I feeling right now? And what is one small step that I can take to meet this need that I have? What can I do to, in the case of stress, for example, can I make a to-do list and prioritize it? Can I ask for help? Can I step away from my computer for a little while? Can I take a break? Do I need to sleep better? And so on and so on. All of a sudden, instead of the option being eat or don't eat, now I have many, many, many options for taking care of my real underlying needs.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you give all the options, and I think it is probably so powerful to actually catch yourself or allow yourself that moment of reflection, right? Instead of going this automatic behavior of starting to eat and just losing yourself, because at a certain moment I think people are not that's how I experienced it, not present anymore in their bodies. They're just eating in this very, automatic way, let's say. I also like that you say, hey, there's other options. And it made me think about, okay, it makes sense. We eat because we don't feel so good. And then we want to become curious about, okay, what is underneath that? What do I need? And what other options, do I have to make me feel better? But what about rewards? Because that is something that I notice in myself, in other women, like that food becomes a reward system also, right? You've done something good and now I'm going to reward myself with something nice.
Right. And we learn that very, very early on. We learn that from our parents and our teachers. And even I used to be a family doctor. For a short period of time, we would give suckers to children at the end of a visit, especially if they'd had a shot. Like we learn very early on that food can be a nice reward for a tough day or getting through something hard. And I want to say again, there's nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with rewarding ourselves with food. However, if it's our only reward, if it's the only way that we celebrate our successes or celebrate our survival, then it really keeps our options narrow. And so a lot of my message for women in particular is that the goal is not don't eat. The goal is, what's the biggest life I can live? What is the biggest vibrant life I can seek? Because the more I increase my options for how I reward myself, and it may be that on a particularly hard day, that at the end, my partner and I celebrate over a wonderful meal and a glass of wine. It may be that when my child and I got through a tough homeschooling day due to the pandemic, that we have ice cream for our afternoon snack. There is nothing wrong with choosing food for a reward. But what about a hot bath? What about a massage? What about a special book to read together, et cetera, et cetera? So again, it's more about increasing our options and considering what would be most satisfying rather than always reaching for food by default.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. And so how would one go for that? Do you think that people, if you know, the women who are watching in the audience, who when they recognize, oh, okay, I have this emotional eating, where would they start? Is it useful for them to have a journal to start? Because of course, I know that a lot of dieting programs have that also, and maybe that's a problem. Maybe that makes it too much of a controlling mechanism. But is it useful for women to, yeah, to kind of start noticing and writing down what happens when they are in the episodes, or when they feel they are lost
Yeah.
in eating?
I think journaling is a great technique. There's many, many techniques. The point here, as you mentioned, is awareness. So we have a journal. One of our things that we offer is a workbook and journal, but we call it an awareness journal. And so you mentioned how journaling or writing things down could be feel more restrictive in nature, more like dieting. And that's true. If your journaling looks like, I ate a half a cup of brown rice, how many calories was that? That feels very diety to me. And having been a person who dieted for many years before I found this passion, I understand how repellent that is. I mean, it's really quite repelling. However, an awareness journal is very different. So for example, ours guides people through 6 questions. Why was I eating? When did I feel like eating? In other words, was I hungry, or was it some other trigger, emotions or otherwise? What did I choose to eat? How did I eat it? How much did I eat? Not in terms of cups and tablespoons or ounces or grams, but in terms of how did I feel afterward? How full was I? And then where did I invest my energy? So it is truly about looking at the entire decision-making process that goes into eating. So for example, in the how much decision point, where we're considering how much we eat, it's not about being good. It's not about following the rules. It's about feeling good. So think about that for just a minute. How often, when you're eating mindlessly or for emotional reasons, how often do you feel worse at the end of eating than you did at the beginning? When we're eating mindfully and checking in and noticing the food and noticing our body's response to the food and eating food that we enjoy, we want to feel better when we're done than we did when we started. In other words, we're eating food to nourish us, to fuel us, to bring enjoyment, maybe connection with other people, and so on. It's not about following the rules or checking the box. It's really about nourishing our bodies in a way that food is naturally designed to do. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself. I love that awareness, indeed, bringing the awareness to yourself, and through the body, feeling, okay, what is the effect of the food that I'm eating on my body? And indeed, how do I feel after I have fed myself? And I think it makes me think like, it has to do with this self-love also, in a way. Like how important is my body, and how much care and how much importance do I give the health and the well-being of myself. And I think there can be a shift, no, when people start living their life or making that a priority, like, hey, I'm actually, I assume that people, when they start working with you, like they make this intention, they set this intention of, hey, I'm finally going to take care of myself and my body in a way that actually, I haven't in previously. How do people come to you, and what is indeed the mindset and maybe the relief that people experience once they discover that there's a different way?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because I think so many people feel that they're failing, that they're doing something wrong, that they don't have enough willpower, that they just haven't found the right diet or spent enough money on it, or they're really oftentimes, for us, come with a sense of failure and hopelessness. And my message to you is, you didn't fail. Diets failed you. The answer was never going to be found in weighing, measuring, counting, and looking food up and writing food down. That was never the issue. The issue is always about learning to understand yourself more and more and more, and using food to fuel that big, vibrant life you crave. So food is not our enemy. It's really part of how we find peace and joy and nourish and nurture our body, mind, heart, and spirit. So this love-hate relationship with food that so many of the people that I work with struggle with at first really becomes a much more mindful, balanced, healthy relationship with food.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. So you mentioned, okay, people are invited indeed to kind of journal and analyze and look at the different steps and what happens and understand themselves better. And what are next stages? What are next phases in the mindful eating?
Well, and I would even back up a little bit from there. So I was answering your question about what's a way to notice what's happening. Journaling is wonderful. Just even freehand journaling is great for that. But I think so many people have such we would call it diet mentality or diet culture. There's so much block about foods being bad or good and you being bad or good depending on what you ate. So we do a lot of work around first breaking that block, but more importantly, putting new steps and strategies and skills in place that do help you manage your eating without having to write things down and look things up. So it becomes truly a self-perpetuating and self-energizing process. Once you learn how to do these things and you practice them, and you, with a bit of guidance, learn how to overcome the inevitable obstacles that will show up as you start discovering how often you're eating for reasons other than hunger, then it becomes this beautiful thing, because now I can not only eat the foods that I love, but when I'm not hungry, I can do what I love. I can meet my needs better. I can address my stress or my boredom or my fatigue or the other things that show up in a better way, a more effective way. And that's really what we all want, right? We want to be as effective and as happy and as functional in our lives as we possibly can. And that comes through awareness and gradual change. Can't hear you.
Sorry, you mentioned the typical obstacles that people encounter. What are those?
Well, lots of different things, of course. I mean, certainly we maybe have developed habits in our lives. An example of this might be a woman who is working very, very hard in her career, maybe in parenthood, maybe with her partner, and she spreads herself too thin, caring for other people, and isn't really prioritizing her own self-care. And then as she burns out or loses her cool or finds herself collapsing at the end of the day or the weekend, she feels guilty because she's not doing it. I mean, I don't know if this sounds familiar to any of you, but this is sort of the pattern. And then she's surprised because she's reaching for food to feel better. Food is a really quick way to take a break and feel better fast, but it doesn't really, again, address the underlying need. If she reaches for food and then feels guilty about it, she's back in that same pattern. So this obstacle of not addressing the underlying belief about what she needs to be doing to be enough is really the obstacle. So many diet programs and food plans, they talk about, well, eat less carbs or eat, vegetarian or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with picking a different food plan. The problem is, her problem is not carbohydrates. Her problem is that she is not prioritizing her own self-care. And until somebody helps her, first of all, discover that, second of all, identify that indeed she is worthy of self-care. And in fact, it makes her a better parent, a better boss or employee, and a better partner. And that also, when she takes care of herself, that she magically, almost seemingly magically, has more time and energy and joy to share with other people. So it's kind of this idea that we have obstacles because of our belief systems and our experiences, but we're just too close to see them. We cannot see through our own paradigms. And so working with somebody who's been there and has been doing this work for a very long time can help you break through so much faster and more effectively than you could ever do on your own.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I can imagine that indeed, that you're too close. Well, it's your own life and it's your own pattern, so it's really difficult to see and to take, to have the insight of what to change. And I find it very interesting that you mentioned the value and the worthiness, because that is. I imagine those are the underlying, let's say, problems, right? Is that people have, well, relate their value to certain roles that they are playing in society, and then I can imagine also how deep, you know, your work goes, and how deep people have to dig, or are allowed or invited to dig into their own psyche and even childhood, I imagine, to think about, hey, where, you know, where is my the covering up of my emotional life and my emotional landscape, the covering up and the compensating with food, what does it cover up? And you know, what haven't I been feeling my entire life? Is that something that you recognize in your work, that you say, yeah, I mean, indeed, people.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting because people come with their own experiences, their own challenges, some with trauma, childhood trauma, and other trauma. Others come with a long history of yo-yo dieting that has kept them and gotten them stuck. And so really, what I love about this work so much is that it's very, very personal. It's not a prescriptive, here, do this for as long as you can. You know, it's not like that at all. It really, as you said, digs deeper, invites people to dig a little bit deeper. Because after all, if we don't heal the underlying reasons that we make the choices that we do, we're going to revert back to those choices when we become vulnerable, when our cup is empty. We will always revert back to those old patterns of behaviors unless we've actually learned what they are and learned new ways of responding.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for myself, I've noticed in my own, you know, relationship with food, I think I realized the first step for me was actually realizing that I had a problem, you know, and it took me 22 years, long time, to really, you know, recognize that. And I was ashamed, actually, in the beginning, to admit that. Is that something that people have also when they maybe?
Oh, it happens more than you could possibly
Mm.
know. I would say that in my experience, the majority of women have a disordered relationship with food for the reasons that we talked about at the beginning. And oftentimes they don't even recognize it because in Western culture, it's considered normal to obsess about food and try to avoid it. And then I mean, it's kind of considered acceptable or expected. And I think that until somebody shines a light on the problem, people don't really understand or recognize how much pain they're in because of that struggle that they're having with food, and how many opportunities they're missing to really care for themselves more effectively. So I'm really glad for you that you were able to discover that finally. And for me, it was close to 25 years myself. And I had gone to high school, college, medical school. I mean, it's not like you and I aren't smart, intelligent, successful women, but this happens all the time, that I work with people who are very successful in other areas of their lives, but they have this little secret or this little struggle that they just think, why can't I get over this? And the reason they can't get over it is because they keep trying the same old thing, maybe a different version of it, but it's always the same old thing. And until we really go a completely different direction, they will stay stuck and find themselves. As I had one woman, I do mindful eating retreats, now virtual, of course, but one woman attended, she was in her 70s, lovely, lovely 70-ish-year-old woman. And she just said, why didn't anybody teach me this decades ago? I mean, she had literally spent her whole life thinking that eventually she would figure this out, and her life had just passed by year by year by year. So she was pretty grateful to have discovered it when she did, but was angry that she hadn't discovered it sooner.
Yeah, well, I totally get that. For me, it was also a kind of a sad moment, like also realizing, wow, I've allowed myself to believe this or to live like this for such a long time. And I realized also how strong the mechanism is that keeps the eating and also the part that comes after, which is a disciplined part, which is a very controlling part of the psyche, the body mind, let's say. Yeah, I noticed how it's related, and it's helpful actually for in other areas of my life. So that's, I guess, I don't know what you think about that, but it seems so difficult to kind of lose control, or there's an element of losing control when you kind of want to change the eating and the disciplined part and the controlling part, because you might lose control over your life in other areas, and areas in which, yeah, you're successful. You have a good career.
You brought up such an important point, because, well, in fact, the first chapter of my book is in charge, not in control. And so let's talk about that for a moment. You've really hit on something important in two different ways. And one is that this being in control shows up with our food, but it also shows up in lots of other areas of our lives too. I find that universally with the people that I work with, who say, wow, this really wasn't just about the food, was it? Like, nope, it wasn't. Because how you do anything is how you do everything. So when you heal your relationship with food, you will often heal your relationship with your work, with the way you approach relationships, and so on. So let's talk about the difference between being in control and being in charge. So a lot of times as women, we try to control our body, control our weight, control our situation, control our work, control our families, control ourselves. And so it's constant tension and holding on and trying to do it right and do it well, and trying to control everybody else so they do it right and do it well. That takes a lot of energy, emotionally and physically. And so at some point we just go, I can't do it anymore, whether it's with food or work or emotions, and then we lose it. And now the opposite of being in control, of course, is being out of control. Now we feel out of control. We're eating, or yelling, raging, screaming, or sleeping, or whatever. It shows up the way that it shows up. And so then we feel guilty about it. So we go from in control, out of control, back in control, back out of control. And we just keep vacillating back and forth. In the middle is another option, which is to be in charge. And being in charge requires us to be aware of what's happening, what's going on, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what physical sensations or tension or hunger or thirst or fatigue or whatever else I'm experiencing, what's happening right now. Once I have that information, that awareness, now I'm in charge of making a choice about how I respond next. That's very different from being in control, because in control means that you have a predetermined set of behaviors that you have to carry out, whereas being in charge means it's not predetermined. You get to decide what's best for you in that moment. Very, very different, very freeing. And once you learn how to do that with food, amazingly, it starts showing up in your parenting. It starts showing up in your work ethic. It starts showing up in other places in your life. And suddenly something that you thought was about the food or your body turns out to be a way of actually becoming a healthier, whole, happier person.
Oh, yes. And that's the vibrant life that we all crave for.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so true.
Exactly.
And yeah, so what I, just recognize and would like to just repeat is like, hey, women, we don't need to be so perfect. And we can let
Absolutely.
go of control and let especially not be so perfect for ourselves, because I feel it's such an internalized mechanisms. We are very strict for ourselves, and therefore we also project that on others.
Exactly.
Mm-mm.
Exactly. Yeah, we could have shortened this interview by just summing it up with, don't try to be so perfect.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. It's not necessary, and it's also not possible.
No.
So this idea that we're going to, withhold happiness from ourselves until we're perfect means that we're going to withhold happiness for the rest of our lives, because we are never going to be perfect. And for that moment that we are, it's fleeting and it's gone, and then we're wishing again. And it's a trap. It's a trap. Many of
Yes.
us have been indoctrinated into the trap. And this conversation and the work that you're doing in this summit is really about helping people see through that and have hope that if it's food, contact me, connect with me. I would love to help you, because now, even though I used to practice as a doctor, I don't do that anymore. I feel I can heal people more effectively by working with them to heal their relationship with food and their bodies. And the beauty of that calling for me, like your calling, is that when people do that, they free up their energy to go do the work that they are so passionate about, or that they need to be doing, instead of wasting so much time thinking about food or thinking about weight and watching their lives slip by.
Oh, this is amazing. I feel it. My entire body is in. Very powerful.
Yes,
Very
it is
powerful. So
powerful.
thank you. Thank you just for doing this. And I'm very grateful that I found you. And I'm very grateful that, all the women that will be watching this and are watching this, we'll get to know you and your work and just, feel that we also can support each other. Because the recognition indeed is first step of saying, hey, I do it with my friends, actually, because I'm a bit, I've taken some steps on that level, so I recognize it around me, and then I make some gentle comments and some sweet comments about it, like, hey, but of course, I think that's important, right, to support each other.
Yes. Yeah.
And to
A
get a
lot of times
stigma.
we're just planting seeds. It's very difficult. It's hard for people who have a very strong paradigm, something that they've been doing for many, many decades. It can be very difficult to see through it. It can be very difficult to admit to ourselves that maybe we've wasted a lot of time and energy, maybe even money, on something that has not helped us at all. And so it can be very challenging. But when we plant seeds with other women and just, as you say, gently, it doesn't have to be like this, or, don't beat yourself up over a couple of cookies. It's just cookies. It's just food. Let's talk about something more interesting than what you had for dinner last night, or how long you spent on the treadmill. We're intelligent, amazing women, that we can have a more interesting conversation than food and exercise.
When you say that, it reminds me of literally conversations that I used to have with my girls. Also, kind of justifying myself. Look, I'm, because I've been my body yo-yos changes because of the eating and so on, and justifying, like, now I'm a bit, heavier because but I'm going to do this and this and this. And that's a
Yeah.
totally, a totally normal conversation to have, to kind of justify the way that your body, your shape and
Well,
the
it's
fact,
normal,
yeah,
but it's not necessary, right?
no.
Like it's become part of what we do, but it's not necessary. And if you think about young children who haven't been indoctrinated into diet culture yet, they're not obsessing about every bite of food. They want to eat so they have enough energy to go play, and then they're gone. They go off and do their thing and they don't think about it again until they get hungry. So this idea, oh, I was bad, now I have to spend an extra hour on the treadmill. We literally turn exercise into punishment for eating, or we turn the opportunity to be physically active into a way of earning the right to eat. And so not only do we then have an unhealthy relationship with food, but now we have an unhealthy relationship with moving our body. It becomes punishment or penance. And I just think that this issue is, it's just so embedded that people often don't even see it for what it is, which is unhealthy and futile, and to know that there is a better way.
Yes, and this
Now,
better way. Yes.
yes, and I would love, would it be possible for us to do a little guided mindful chocolate
Mm,
tasting to experience this?
yes, of course.
I think that obviously for me, from what you can tell from what we've talked about, that for me, mindful eating is more than just a sensory experience. I see mindful eating as being the act of awareness from way before food ever hits your mouth. It's really about noticing and awareness of why you're eating in the first place. And when you said earlier, the names of my books are Eat What You Love, okay, chocolate, and Love What You Eat. In other words, bring that loving kindness and loving care to the food that you're eating. So that's what I'd love for us to do together if we could.
Yes,
So do you have chocolate?
I do.
So let's first have a little feast for the eyes. So before we ever even think about tasting it, just looking at it, noticing it's wrapped beautifully, perhaps. Maybe you notice the shape or the size of it, maybe the weight of it in your hand. So we can begin the sensory experience before we put the food in our mouth. Next, before we begin to eat the food, just check in. What is your reason for eating this chocolate right now? Is it to learn and experience mindful eating? Is it pleasure? Is it stress? Whatever it is, and it could be all of those things. Just know for yourself why you're eating in the first place, because that will really help you eat with intention. All right? Now, if you're going to eat this chocolate, let's go ahead and unwrap it and listen with your ears as you unwrap your chocolate, sort of noticing that as it becomes open, you begin to notice the aromas, right? A little bit of aroma starts coming up and we start to say, maybe you even notice yourself salivating a little bit. And to be clear, salivation isn't hunger, it's appetite. Nothing wrong with that, but just know that just because you're salivating or you want to eat doesn't necessarily mean that your body needs food right now. All right, so now that you have it open, take a look at it and notice how beautiful it looks. Mine has little bits of almonds in it, which I love. I love crunchy. It's a dark piece of chocolate. It's very thick, which I love biting through, right? So just take a little look at the chocolate and have yourself a feast for your eyes. And then decide where you're going to bite. Are you going to pop the whole thing in your mouth if it's a small piece? Are you going to take a little tiny bite? It doesn't matter, but just decide before you do. And then bring it up to your mouth and your nose. Take another little, yes, beautiful. And then a small bite or a big bite, whatever you're going to do, take that bite and then put the rest of it down and just pause for a moment and show up to the party. Feel the weight of the chocolate on your tongue. Yes, the melting of it, the flavors. As it melts, you start smelling the aroma up through the back of the mouth into the nose. And then it melts, it starts to spread across your tongue. At some point, you might even begin to chew. So this part is really about savoring the entire experience of eating. I mean, think about it. How many times could we have eaten 3 or 4 pieces of chocolate this size in the time that it's taken us to enjoy one mindful bite? Because after all, isn't that why we eat chocolate, is to bring pleasure to ourselves? So we bring pleasure by being fully present in the experience. And so when you're done experiencing that bite, you swallow, notice the act of swallowing, maybe feeling it, even noticing the finish. If you taste wine, the finish is the aroma, the taste, the flavors that you continue to experience long after you've swallowed your bite or your sip of wine. So we often move on to the next bite before the previous bite is even gone. Let's do one more. When you're ready, let's go ahead and pick your chocolate up again. Again, take a look, decide where you're going to bite from. Take another sniff, just breathe in the aromas of the chocolate, noticing what you can smell there, coffee aromas or dark chocolate or maybe even the almonds. Take your bite. And this time, focus on all the tastes. Certainly you're noticing sweetness, maybe a little bit of bitterness. Sometimes chocolate has a bit of salt in it. Hopefully not sourness, but sometimes you'll have dried fruit or something like that in your chocolate, or a bit of an orange flavor. And as you chew and as you allow this to melt, allow the aromas to come up, because this is the interesting thing about flavor. A lot of people think that it's the taste on their tongue. Well, taste, as we probably learned in grade school, is sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is savoriness, which you can get from dark chocolate. But everything else you're tasting is actually coming from the aromas. So it's the aromas and the taste that give you flavor. So by taking small bites, by breathing, by paying attention, you're really maximizing or optimizing the experience of that one bite or one piece of chocolate. So it's truly becoming a sensuous experience, a full sensory experience. And one last thing to pay attention to: liking or disliking. Sometimes we eat food that doesn't even really taste that good. It's not well prepared, or it's becomes stale, or it's not what we were in the mood for. If we're mindless, we might habitually eat the rest anyway, or clean our plate, or finish off the bar or the chocolate, when in fact we're not even really enjoying it. We deserve better than that. If it's not to your liking, switch, change to something else, or promise yourself you'll eat something that you enjoy more the next time you eat, instead of just finishing something mindlessly. And when you're completely finished with that experience, just sit with it, notice it, decide whether you want or need another piece or more, but make that decision at that moment rather than deciding ahead of time that you're going to eat this whole bar or this whole bag or even just one piece. Decide at each moment.
Thank you.
You are very welcome.
Oh, it's so sensual.
It's very sensual, right?
Yeah.
So different from sitting down with a bag of something in front of the television or in front of our phones and eating mindlessly with no awareness of the experience. I like to say to people, if you love to eat, act like it, act like it. Bring your full intention and attention to the experience. It's so much more satisfying.
Oh, it sure is. Now I can feel how indeed chocolate is a replacement for orgasms and for sex. Even
So,
more so.
yeah, so isn't that the truth that when we talked early on about how, food can help, it is fully acceptable for us to eat for emotional reasons or to get emotional satisfaction out of eating.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not the only way. It's just a way.
Yes, and it can become a celebration. Like this is a very almost ritualistic way to eat. Okay.
And you know
Wow.
what? Not every experience has to be a long, drawn out meal. That's not always
Mm.
practical. But if you even take the first 2 or 3 bites of every meal like this, I promise it will expand your enjoyment and your experience incredibly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I can see how bringing that mindfulness and practicing that mindfulness also, yeah, indeed will have effect on other effects on people's lives. So yeah. Thank you so much for everything, for all the insights, for the sharing, for the beautiful meditation. To wrap up, I would like, to invite you to tell people how they can work with you. And if I'm not wrong, if I'm right, then you have a little gift for us also.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I'm a teacher by heart. I love people to learn, and I love that when you learn, you are able to use your energy in bigger ways. So we provide a lot of free resources on our website, which is amihungry.com, amihungry.com. So there is a quiz to test your own eating style. There are lots and lots of blog posts and articles and videos for you there. And what I would like to gift to your listeners is a copy of the first chapter of Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat. When we talked about being in charge instead of in control, and when I talked about the 6 decision points that you can pay attention to when you're eating, all of that is in the first chapter. So that one chapter, I hope, will open your eyes to a completely new way to think about food.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
People will be
let
able.
me give you that URL, and I hope you'll put it in the notes as
Yes, yes,
well.
yes, yes. So all the women, they can check your speakers page, and all the links will be there. And
Absolutely.
they will also be invited to write you and to give you feedback and to give also comments on the page, so that we just keep the connection going and create a little community of the Sublime Women Summit community. Yes, yes.
I would love that. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you learned, what you thought, what your questions are. That would be beautiful.
So thank you so much, Michelle.
Pleasure. My
Mm.
pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It was really, really, really a gift to me. I appreciate that.